They were embracing AI within their university, where many others were squelching it.
Right.
And what the dean was saying is to think about it. This is not going to go away. We want to train our students. We want to open their doors on how to phrase the questions better as they're going in and using AI, because that's really where the value is going to be.
Have you ever wondered what makes some companies grow while others plateau or fade away? Or what makes an inspirational leader versus someone who teams dread working for? On this podcast, the executive team at Thinc Strategy chat with business leaders who share their lessons and journeys, their strategies on growth and leadership, and how they're continuously thinking ahead. On today's episode, Cindy Anderson and Karen Albritton are with Karen Wiltgen, computer science and software development consultant. Someone who explains what companies should be seeking and concerned about with software, AI, and what's in the cloud. Here's Cindy Anderson.
Well, Karen, I am so excited today about our guest. She is so smart and so capable helping clients independently think about their technology design. She doesn't work for a software company or anything like that. She has a history of designing technology that's safe and user-friendly and really meets the needs of today. And I hear from clients all of the time that one of their biggest concerns is technology, the cost of technology, the use of technology. Do we have too much? Are we using what we have?
Absolutely. I mean, so many of our clients, technology is not their core competency.
Right.
There's a lot of mystery around it. It is a growing line item in their budget, like you said. And they are now seeing new opportunities or maybe challenges with things like AI and machine learning, and yet they wonder how far should they go, and they need some outside perspective that doesn't have a vested interest in what the choice is, that's truly neutral.
Absolutely. And thinking about it not only from a cost perspective, but really looking at the return on investment, not only from a financial view, but also a people view. The folks that are young in our workforce that are coming right out of college or maybe 10 years out of college, their level of sophistication is so different than mine.
Yep.
And I really rely on their ability. So I'm really excited to hear more about what Karen can share with us about best practices. I think it's really important for business owners and leaders out there to know how to navigate all of this. So with that, let's introduce Karen Wiltgen. We're so excited to have you with us today.
I'm excited to be here, Cindy and Karen. It's an honor and it's a privilege to be able to share a little bit about my background, but also provide some insights in where technology is and what it really can do to add value and benefit to your organization.
That's my biggest concern as a business owner is I have no problem investing in something that makes us better, but there's so much coming at me. Tell me, how did you get into this line of work?
Well, from a background, I'm a math major, computer science by training, and I started out along those lines right out of college, but quickly got into and really stumbled into consulting. And can I say the company was Deloitte? Mm-hmm. And spent about 13 years there. And a little bit about what makes me tick. I love solving problems. I love finding the results and accomplishing that thing and really trying to make that situation come to life. So that's why I got into the computer science and software development. But I also then really love to be with people and really help them align technology and make it really beneficial to them. So I moved along that continuum of software development to business analysis. And then I had a really strong mentor and partner at Deloitte that got me into thinking more strategically and where can we go with this and where you are here today, but what about the future? How do you future-proof what you're doing? Because selecting or doing something today doesn't mean that in 5 years, 7 years, it's still going to be relevant. So how do we think that far ahead? And that kind of just evolved into a career that said, I really love helping companies, organizations be more than they ever thought they could by leveraging technology to really achieve that Northern Star.
Yeah. Do you think that a lot of leadership make decisions based on what their problem is they have today, and they kind of miss the thinking about what do we really need to improve our performance, to think about operations? Do you feel like sometimes technology is just, we have to upgrade to this, so we're going to?
There's a lot of that, and I'll call it also the noise from the industry. They hear about, it used to be RPA, robotic process automation, right? Now it's AI and machine learning and these buzz terms out there. And a lot of times they don't even have their core foundation set up. So if you think about it, you have a ranch style home and you want to put a second story on, and you just start ripping out and start building. No, you would get an architect, an engineer that says, hey, what do I need to do to my foundation, my core systems, my infrastructure, my security in order to build that second story? And that's where, leaders sometimes forget that. They just get so interested in, I got to keep up with what's going on around me. I forget about creating that plan and bringing in, I'll say, some experts as well. If they don't have an in-house, how do they work with other individuals to make sure that what they're doing is going to be sustainable for the future and really add that value?
Yeah. So they get preoccupied maybe with a new shiny object.
Yep.
And so when you think about that foundation, I love that because we both work with architects and we do a lot of work in that area. When you think about that foundation, what are some of the things that business owners ought to be thinking about as they design that solid tech foundation for their business?
I think there's actually two things to look at, and they kind of weave into each other. So if you think about the core fabric is things around how does it fit my business, right? Just because my neighbor does it doesn't mean that it's right for me. So what are my business needs and requirements? And then is it scalable? Is it going to take us where, think about that Northern Star. Is it, my neighbor could be off to the right and I'm going off to the left. So it may not be the right fit just because of where you're directionally going. The other part is around performance. There's a lot of data that companies are collecting today. Do you have that performance? Is it going to be responsive, right? The other side is around resiliency and being able to really adapt to things, right? How is it going to stand up as you go forward? You also have to be thinking about security. And how is that going to say? Because you need to protect your brand. Every time you open yourself up to new technology, that leads hackers an opportunity to get in. So can't forget about security and backing up your data. So there's a lot of moving pieces out there that they need to be looking at to kind of set that foundation to really build upon as they move forward.
One of the things that has been a big issue in the last, I would say really probably since 2020, is the labor, how to handle labor and the use of technology, particularly in professional services and marketing firms and digital firms, technology, architecture, engineering. Labor's their biggest problem, skilled labor with the right skill to be able to do the job. And so we're looking to technology to help us do more with what we have. What do you think companies have to be thinking about today that might have been different, say, 5 years ago with technology?
There's a couple of different ways to answer that question, Cindy. So when I look at that, I'll call it the dynamic workforce, right? There's different ways to look at it. A company can say, what is my core business? And do I want to focus just on my core business functions? So things like, back office accounting or some things in IT. Do we need a help desk? Do I need to employ those people? Because maybe I'm having a hard time finding them or keeping them. Or can I outsource that? Going in with the kind of that managed services kind of an arrangement. So that's another way to kind of augment your staff, is to look at what's core and what is really going to differentiate you from the competition. Focus on that. And let some of those other common processes be outsourced, right? You can think about that even from security. You could security if you don't need to hire someone full time, but you want to have someone with that oversight. Could I hire an outsourced security officer to come in and manage that for me, periodically, or do that on a managed services perspective? So that's one way to look at it. The other side of the equation around the staff is how efficient are you? Because that's what I see a lot when we're talking with that CEO or that CXO within the organization is how come I'm not getting the most out of the investments I've already made? Or how come, or am I really? I don't really know. Or it seems like my data is not the same from one to the other. And that's because people are extracting the data, doing Excel spreadsheets, massaging the data to put it in a format. And so that's why one report looks a little bit different, because it depends on what they've taken, how they've worked it. So how can we automate those functions so that they're not doing those common tasks or less value-added tasks,
right,
and we get automation to do that, and they can then, with fewer resources, do those value-added activities.
Right. And also, hopefully, a lot of what we see on the finance side, and I'm sure on the growth and marketing side, there are other issues as well, your customer relationship management system, that sort of thing. But we see internal controls being a real challenge.
Right.
As you scale your business, if you're an acquirer and you're going out and you're growing, I would think the technology design is one of the most important things in your integration process. Because part of the reason that a smaller business might sell to a larger is for the infrastructure they can provide. How safe is that? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, we see that a lot. I can't invest. I'm a smaller, or even on the lower end of that mid-sized company. I can't invest the way I want to because I don't have the funds. So I'm a little bit less than good enough, right?
Right.
So I buy into it and I merge, and there's great synergies there. So how do we then blend what may be good? That doesn't mean everything I had was bad, but how do I pull that together so that I start acting as one firm? What we like to see is some kind of an assessment, a strategy to say, okay, what do we have today that's good and working? What do we really need? What's our combined Northern Star? Because the Northern Star may look a little bit different. We now have two companies that have come together. So what does that Northern Star look like? And then what's that gap? That gap then says, hey, we have some things that are good. We're going to keep those. And then we're going to build on that to either strengthen security, strengthen our technology, and then look at the applications that can support efficiency and productivity or visibility into metrics and KPIs, whether it's business intelligence or even on the sales side, the revenue side, if they don't have that in place.
Yeah. It seems like the cost of technology is changing too. Now you can get AI tools and things like that for a couple $100 a year. You can have a subscription service. In the time that you've been in this practice, how have you seen the cost of technology evolve with the changes in technology?
Yeah, so that's a loaded question, Cindy, because
Thank
some
you.
people would say that the cost of technology has actually gone up.
Right.
Because I used to be able
the total cost is a lot more higher for sure.
I used to be able to buy something and pay for it and be done with it, other than maintenance and support. Today, I have a subscription. So that's month over month, I'm always paying for it. If I add users, I'm paying more for it. And that's becoming sometimes a little bit of I'll call it fee fatigue for some organizations. But the thing you have to remember is with things in the cloud and that subscription-based service, you're really paying that vendor, that provider, to stay ahead of the game. So if we take certain software as an example, and I'll throw out two. Salesforce is one, Microsoft, Info, there's almost all of the major players today. They are incorporating this technology in their ecosystem, right? So as an example, Microsoft has an AI component they call Copilot.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. It also has a component around business intelligence. They also have RPA in their ecosystem. So if you're doing Microsoft CRM or Microsoft ERP, you have leverage to that technology, and they are integrating that new technology into their products. So even though it may appear that it costs more, they're figuring out for you, for your industry sector, how to make that work. And you don't have to buy a second product necessarily to do it yourself.
Yeah. And I think that's where we see a lot of issues is that, some firms will say, well, some people use this and some people use that, and we try to, but really consistency is how you keep it safe too, right? Having set processes and systems that you train your staff. So talk to us a little bit about getting your staff trained for what's coming. Another loaded question.
Well, what you're really talking about is end user adoption. And those people that play in like myself, that play in that technology space, the software space, will say that it's much easier to implement a system than it is to get the end user to adapt it, right?
Exactly.
So you've heard the term change management or organizational readiness. That is really kind of what you're talking about. And one of the biggest things that we see where it becomes successful is making sure that you have the right tone from the top. So start there. If they're not bought into that, the leadership and having that executive sponsor to really say, hey, this is what we're doing. It's leading us toward this Northern Star. And then have all of that middle management as well. I hate to say drink the Kool-Aid, but really be able to carry that message of, yes, it's not necessarily going to be an easy road, but this is what's going to get us to meet our needs and meet the business's needs. And it's going to be change. And if you have a core set of champions that can help you take you there, right, be a part of the project from day one and really understand that messaging, then it's not just, I train you a month before you go live, but you have that communication, you understand where there's maybe some paths for resistance, and you're really working that throughout your entire project. But you also have a culture of change, right? Where you don't just start and never finish, you start and you complete, and then you can continue to carry it forward. So there's continuous improvement, there's continuous change, but then everyone's kind of bought into it because they understand the long-term journey that they're on.
And it seems like that approach is you're taking one step at a time. So it maybe isn't as overwhelming if you've just bought a company, for example, and you want to integrate the systems. A lot of times we'll see companies say, oh, we'll just leave everything the same for a while. The challenge is the new folks that have merged into the organization with the technology really want, once they get adjusted to the change, they want some of the new technology. Right. So when is the right time? It doesn't always have to be day one, but there has to be milestones and a strategy to get to your end result, right?
And that's where a roadmap comes into play. And if you can communicate that to your staff, that's a huge benefit. I'll give you an example. So we worked with an organization to help them build their technology, automation, roadmap, and strategy, and aligned with the business. But I can tell you, when we were going through that process and we had what their needs were, and we had the list of initiatives, and let's just say there were 20 of those initiatives, and we sat down and said, okay, we could prioritize them for you and say, this is what you should do in this order over the next 3 years. But we want the leadership to do that. You tell us what's important. The first 2-hour session we had with them, they were all over the board. You might have thought the first 3 were this, and you might have thought her bottom 3 were the top 3. And as they started having this dialogue around why and why one felt it was more important here or there, they really started to listen and said, okay, we got to go back and talk internally first. We met a week later, and we voted again on what order they should be. Was it 100% match? It wasn't. But they were much more aligned. And when that roadmap got finished, every one of those leaders had it on their board, but not only them, but their staff did as well. So if there was something like the pandemic came, right, or some other big disruption in their industry, and they think, well, that's not on the roadmap. We need to do something. Their steering committee could talk about it and say, how does that affect the plan? Right. Everyone was on board. They knew what their strategy was. They knew what their initiatives were. And it was much of a more intentful conversation because everyone was behind the path and the journey that they were on. So to make a pivot was easier because it wasn't like we had to get everyone back on board again.
Right.
For everything. It was just these couple of things that would come up once in a while, as they do in normal business world, right? The world changes all the time, and we have to be able to be adaptable and be able to pivot. But they were able to do it because they had their path already, and it was easier to make those small decisions in their minds as opposed to going, oh, we got to upset the whole apple cart.
Well, one of the things that I noticed in the pandemic, you mentioned that, and we saw research that the digital transformation that were planned for organizations actually accelerated because it had to. And we're all reaping the benefits of that, now with the way we're working and the way we're, interacting with the world around us. But, I see things now that we couldn't have imagined then, like the application of artificial intelligence in some of the tools that we already use. Also, I see with some organizations, you may have some early adopters within the organization who will be out there on their own, sort of beginning to use it in the workplace, and the leadership team isn't there yet. They haven't started to embrace it. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about maybe the opportunities for that, but also some of the pitfalls that can occur when that happens.
Yeah, and there are pitfalls. I think one of the biggest things an organization needs to do is set a direction on that kind of use. So we were talking a little bit before we got into this podcast around, the younger generation, the kids right out of school that are using things like ChatGPT and Copilot for their personal use, right? And doing things. So they just expect it. Why can't I do it at work? And if I've got a personal account, I'll just type something in. Once again, I was working with a company, and we were going to meet. We were going to do an all-day session. We come in. He gets us into the conference room, and he's like, very frantic, I have to head out for a couple of minutes. I'll be right back. He heads out. We just get set up with our presentation. He comes back in, and he explains the situation. It's like, I just had someone in accounting going in and putting the last 5 years worth of our financial information into artificial intelligence and saying, tell me the trends that you see. A very legitimate thing. He was going to start with something and then build off of it. But what he failed to realize is that he put company information out there into the World Wide Web, into the public, and the firm didn't have a policy around it. So, Karen, to your point, it's okay to embrace it. You need to make sure that your team is aware of the do's and the don'ts, or hey, there's risk here. We don't put that kind of personal information out there. It's okay to ask these kinds of questions and have a policy around doing it, because it wasn't that it was sensitive information. It was confidential information. They were privately held. They didn't want that out in the masses. But at the end of the day, the staff person was saying, hey, it's helping me go faster on doing this. Exactly. I'm going to take this and build off of it. So you don't want to squelch that enthusiasm, that curiosity, that innovative thinking, but you also have to protect the company.
Right.
So, and I think that's one of the things that people understand. You want that innovative culture. I seen organizations create an innovation hub, or even an outside off the hours over the lunch hour group that will talk about innovation and how they can get it, how they can apply it, and then what does that mean for the organization, so that they create a culture of adaptability and innovation and moving things forward, and how can we use this technology to differentiate. If you don't have those kinds of thought leaders in the organization or have that culture, you're going to be a lagger in the industry. And your teams, your staff, are going to leave because they're going to see other companies using that newer technology and wanting to go there to enhance their resume.
Absolutely. I remember creating social media governance policies, web governance policies, all of these different policies, or just guidelines for organizations. Are you seeing the same thing happen with AI?
Yes.
Where do you start?
Well, there are organizations like Infotech, Gartner, that have templates and tools out there for start with this kind of a policy and then tailor to your own. You don't want to squelch. You don't want to put the lid on it, but you don't want to have it exposed. So that's the biggest way to do it is make them aware of what's there and then give them an opportunity to try it. We've also seen organizations do an innovation challenge where they provide individuals, teams to submit ideas for use of technology and how it could help either their business or product or their customers. So give them an outlet or a means to be able to try the innovation. And then with that, see where it goes and maybe develop some of those or bring them into the corporate business and structure. So it covers two areas. It gives your staff the ability to use them in a business setting for business problems and looking to see where you could stretch and grow. And it also gives you a chance to play with some of the technology that's out there and see how it might benefit your organization.
This has been very interesting to me. I think a lot of business leaders are going to this is resonating. I will ask one more question about the AI piece because I love ChatGPT and I love all these technologies. I'm one of those people that will adopt early and play with it. And
I use it all the time.
And I love it. And it did occur to me very early on, like I never put anything in there that has a person's name or a business name or anything that would be confidential. And one of the other things that I have realized that I think a lot of business owners or leaders are afraid that people will just use that voice, the AI voice, and not personalize it, and everything's going to be kind of rote. My experience, for me anyway, is I never use what they exactly provide. I always end up modifying it to my voice. And I know they talk about AI gets used to your voice. Sometimes I don't want my voice.
Yeah.
We were just talking about that. Sometimes I want someone else's voice because my voice is probably not the right one.
That you want to listen to.
I want something maybe that's a little less direct or, a little more, friendly or whatever. And sometimes I find it just really gives you different ideas. It's like having someone sitting in your office with you that you can go to that can give you some really good feedback, but you still have to make your own decisions. Right. So I think this excuse that AI is going to take over everything that we do, I think really comes down again to these policies and procedures and how do we use it? Do we just assume? Because I don't assume everything they're saying is correct.
Right. That's a very good point, Cindy. I want to bring up 2 points here. If you use it as one of your sources, right? Because I've played like ChatGPT and Copilot, against each other, but I'll ask the same question, and they come up with different feedback or responses. So I use it as a source, but I also go to other sources on the internet as well, or I read books, or it's my own knowledge. So I'm using them all as sources to pull together my response, whether that's a thought leadership article, whether that's some challenge, whatever it might be. But the other point I wanted to bring up is I remember traveling. This was probably about a year ago, maybe 3 or 4 months after ChatGPT had come up, and there's this whole struggle on what do universities do, and do they need to limit it? And I sat down. I had news on, and they were doing this little segment with a university. I can't remember the name of it, but they were embracing AI within their university, where many others were squelching it.
Right.
And what the dean was saying is to think about it. This is not going to go away. We want to train our students. We want to open their doors on how to phrase the questions better as they're going in and using AI, because that's really where the value is going to be. Right. I can be pretty poor at phrasing my question and get a very narrow answer back. And you might be not only better at phrasing your question, but then ask the question 2 or 3 different ways. Now you have 3 or 4 different responses that you can look at and really be able to bring out a much richer content from what you're getting, right? So when you think about that, if we can train our resources, our staff, our employees on how to be better crafters of that question and tapping into it, that's huge. The other piece you need to understand is what's the data source behind it?
Right.
And do you trust that data source?
Mm-hmm,
Because if you don't, or depending on how that data is, your answers coming back can be biased or tainted.
Mm-hmm.
That's why you can't use it as the only source. It should be used as a source.
And see, this comes back full circle, I think, to your career choice and solving problems as a consultant or an advisor. It comes down to asking great questions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a valuable skill no matter where you are. And maybe our next jobs are prompt engineers, right?
I agree, right?
you go.
Right.
Yep.
You know, I really think too, Karen, when I think about both Karens, when I think about this question about setting a process and having this development for your students or your team or whomever it is, I have to think this builds trust. Mm-hmm. Because if you have a plan, even if you don't hit every milestone at 100%, but you're still moving in the same direction and everyone understands why we might not have hit it this time at 100, but next time we'll be close, or whatever the answer is, it feels like it would build trust with people. Like when my company says they're doing this, that is what we're doing. Now, we may have to change how we're going to do it along the way because of new information, but our goal is the same. And it goes back to the bigger picture. Why are we doing this?
Staff, employees, individuals want to be excited about where they're going. They want to see that there's something in it for me in advancing my career and that I'm going to be learning. And if you have that culture within your organization of continuous learning and that there is change and that we want our staff to embrace that and help us get there, then people are going to be excited to get there. So your question earlier about the workforce and that dynamic for workforce, because they can't go anywhere. If they find value within your organization and that they are achieving their own personal goals, they're more likely to stay.
100%. Yeah, so if you're thinking about either being acquired or you are responsible for acquisitions and you're trying to be prepared to answer the seller's questions, what are some things you need to think about? What are some things that are really going to matter most in a successful integration of a new firm into your organization?
Yeah, there's a couple of things there. Because one of the things that we've seen in close to that transaction being complete is that the acquired firm or the soon-to-be acquired firm gets hacked. And so when you look at that space, how secure are you? Security is a big deal.
100%.
And do you have your infrastructure, your firewalls? Do you have your technology in a secure space? Is it ever going to be 100%? No. But you may want to spend some time on that or looking at that as you move into this transaction. The other side that we see a lot around is really understanding where technology is and how old it is. Because a lot of companies haven't invested or they may not have invested it in the right places. Mm-hmm. And do they have that technology to get where you want to go?
And even compliance around contracts, you know, with engineers, for example, we've run into situations where they're working in the federal space. There's certain security requirements. Now we're acquiring a firm or we're being acquired. How does that change the transaction? Because this is something we have to comply with whatever governing authority that we're working with. So security, to me, it's the scariest piece of owning a business today or running a business today, to me, is cyber threat.
Right.
Yeah. It's really scary how easy it is. And I think email has been where I've seen it the most, where people are, you know, being a finance person, I can't tell you how many emails I have received to change someone's banking information. Mm-hmm. And, you know, of course, we've known now for years that if someone requests that via email, you don't ever accept it. You call them, you talk to them, you verify. But it's scary how many different ways they can get into your system, right?
Yeah. And it's interesting when you look at that whole security space, the big organizations, they're pretty secure. They have the budgets, they have the
Right.
team, they have the internal team to really try and secure it. That doesn't mean they're not going to get hacked, but it's like, how much harder is it going to be to go after Fort Knox?
Right.
The smaller organizations aren't as likely to have that same manpower and budget to be able to secure it as well. So those hackers are going after that small and medium-sized organizations because they're probably easier to get exposure to, whether that's a data breach or whatever. So that's where there's some things around the ransomware, but it's also your employee own awareness and training on it. Because Cindy, you're right, that we call it social engineering as well, that phishing is probably the easiest way to do it. And what do we train our staff to be?
Responsive and kind
and customer service oriented. So when
Yeah.
someone calls, when you get that email and they ask for that request, we don't tell them to second guess it. We don't tell them to, we tell them to go ahead and answer. They ask, tell me this, tell me that. And we need to make sure that there's that service with an element of suspicion as well. So there's a balance there, but that social awareness on what might be a problem is key, because that's where we find most of the things happening between that and then even internal threats. Not as much, but you might have the disgruntled employee that has some issues as well.
Absolutely.
So now one final question from Karen A to Karen W. How do you think ahead?
Karen, this is actually an easy question. It kind of comes back to where I started. I'm always curious. And when I work with kids coming out of college, students coming out of college, and they ask, they're like, oh, I'm done with studying. I'll never have to open a book again. And it's like, that's the wrong approach to take. I'm curious. So I read a lot, listen to podcasts. So I want to understand what's new and what's going on in the world. But then I also listen to experts, whether that's going to trade shows, but I also listen to a lot of webinars on different things so that I understand where things are going, what are the trends, and so that I can either dig into it on my own then when I hear something new and I'm more curious on it, or I think it can apply to what I'm working on, I can do my own digging. The other side is I look outside of my own industry on things, because if I'm working in healthcare, there may be something over in manufacturing or over in retail that I don't need to look at that, but they may be applying something that could be parallel to something that I'm trying to solve, and I'm too afraid to look at it or don't even think I should because it's not my same industry. But there are a lot of parallels and uses which can be transferable, modified maybe, but can be transferable in there. So looking outside of your industry is something that I look at as well. But I'd say just remain curious, and ask why. Why wouldn't we? And then you look in your personal life and saying, why am I not applying this in business?
Yeah. It seems like life is more interesting when you're curious.
Yes.
I think. Karen, tell us, how would someone get in touch with you to learn more about technology design and some of the things that we've talked about today?
I'd say there's two ways to do that. Thinkstrategy.com, our website, would be a great place to do it. I'm also on LinkedIn, Karen Wiltgen. I'm happy to respond either way.
Well, thank you so much, Karen. You've given us a lot to think about, and I know that it's something that a lot of folks we come across and talk with are really concerned about today. And you've given us, I think the roadmap, Karen, is probably one of the best things that I can think of to help your company not only build the trust with your team that things are going to happen, but also clarifies exactly what needs to happen, how it needs to happen. And I really appreciate you sharing those stories with us today.
No problem. Happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Think Ahead. We hope you've gained some valuable insight and inspiration to propel your business forward. Remember, success is not a destination but a journey, and Think Strategy is here to help you every step of the way. Visit thinkstrategy.com. That's THINC strategy.com for more info. And for more of this podcast, press the follow button and share with your network. This podcast is edited and produced by Earfluence. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again soon on Think Ahead.